The fluorescent lights hummed their sterile song in the underground vault of the National Archives building, as archivists carefully opened file boxes that had remained sealed for over 60 years, their contents protected by classification stamps that bore the weight of national security and the shadows of November 22, 1963. The sound of pages rustling echoed through the climate-controlled chamber, where documents marked top secret and eyes only finally surrendered their secrets to the harsh glare of transparency. Each page, a fragment of truth that had been locked away since the dark afternoon when President John F. Kennedy's motorcade turned onto Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas, and changed the course of American history forever. The manila folders contained more than just paper and ink. They held the collected observations, fears, and operational details of intelligence agencies that had watched, recorded, and analyzed every movement of a drifter named Lee Harvey Oswald, a former Marine who had defected to the Soviet Union, only to return to America carrying secrets that would die with him in a Dallas police station basement, 2 days after he allegedly fired the shots that killed the 35th President of the United States. The documents revealed a web of surveillance so extensive and detailed that it challenged everything the American public had been told about what the government knew and when they knew it, exposing a pattern of intelligence gathering that began years before that tragic November day and continued long after the Warren Commission concluded that Oswald had acted alone. These files, drawn from declassified archives and public records, tell the story of the most scrutinized murder in American history through the eyes of the very agencies that observed it unfold. The President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992 had promised the American people that all government records related to the assassination would be released by October 26, 2017. But that deadline came and went, with thousands of documents still locked away behind claims of national security and ongoing intelligence operations. President Trump, during his first term, released some files but allowed intelligence agencies to continue withholding sensitive materials, a pattern that continued under President Biden, with additional delays and partial releases that frustrated researchers and conspiracy theorists alike. The bureaucratic dance of classification and redaction had stretched for decades, each administration passing the burden to the next, while the American public waited for answers to questions that had haunted the nation since that November afternoon when 3 shots rang out in Dealey Plaza and the world watched a president die in real time on television screens across America. The Central Intelligence Agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and other alphabet agencies had cited ongoing operations, foreign relations concerns, and the protection of intelligence methods as justification for keeping thousands of pages hidden from public view. But critics argued that after 6 decades, most operational concerns should have been resolved and the public's right to know should supersede bureaucratic convenience. On January 23, 2025, President Trump signed Executive Order 14176, declaring that more than 50 years after the assassinations of President Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the federal government had not released all of its records to the public, and that their families and the American people deserved transparency and truth. The order stated unequivocally that it was in the national interest to finally release all records related to these assassinations without delay, marking a watershed moment in the long struggle for government transparency. Within 15 days, the Director of National Intelligence and the Attorney General were ordered to present a plan for the full and complete release of Kennedy assassination records, with similar timelines established for the Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King files. The language of the executive order carried an urgency that previous administrations had lacked, acknowledging that the continued redaction and withholding of information was not consistent with the public interest, and that the release of these records was long overdue. The first wave of releases came on March 18, 2025, at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, when the National Archives uploaded 32,000 pages contained in 1,123 PDF files to their public servers, followed by additional releases later that evening, and in subsequent days that brought the total to over 77,000 newly declassified pages. Researchers, journalists, and amateur investigators around the world immediately began downloading and analyzing the documents, searching for revelations that might finally answer lingering questions about the assassination or reveal new details about government operations during the height of the Cold War. The sheer volume of material represented the largest single release of classified documents in American history, a digital avalanche of intelligence reports, surveillance records, operational memos, and investigative files that painted a picture of government secrecy far more extensive than most Americans had ever imagined. The agencies tasked with protecting American interests during the Cold War operated in a world where secrecy was not just preferred but essential for survival, where intelligence officers recruited assets, monitored communications, and conducted operations that pushed the boundaries of law and morality in service of national security. The Central Intelligence Agency, established in 1947 as America's primary foreign intelligence service, had grown into a massive bureaucracy with stations around the world, each tasked with gathering information about potential threats to American interests while conducting covert operations designed to influence foreign governments and protect American strategic objectives. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, traditionally focused on domestic law enforcement, had expanded its counterintelligence mission to monitor American citizens who might pose security risks, including those who traveled to communist countries, expressed sympathy for foreign ideologies, or engaged in activities that might compromise national security. During the Eisenhower and Kennedy administrations, the intelligence community operated under a mandate that gave broad latitude for surveillance and intelligence gathering, justified by the existential threat posed by the Soviet Union and its allies during the height of the Cold War. The doctrine of containment required constant vigilance against communist infiltration and subversion, leading to programs that monitored American citizens, intercepted mail, conducted surveillance of foreign embassies, and recruited assets within foreign governments. The political pressures of the time demanded results, and intelligence agencies responded with programs that would later be recognized as overreaches of executive power, but which at the time were seen as necessary measures to protect American democracy against an implacable enemy that sought to destroy the Western way of life through espionage, propaganda, and subversion. The newly released documents revealed the sophisticated methods employed by American intelligence agencies to monitor potential threats and gather information about foreign operations, including techniques that would have seemed like science fiction to earlier generations, but which became routine tools of espionage during the Cold War. The CIA developed fluoroscopic scanning technology to detect hidden microphones in their offices, using X-ray equipment to peer inside objects and identify surveillance devices that might have been planted by foreign intelligence services. Intelligence officers created systems for secretly marking public phone boxes that were under surveillance, using paint visible only under ultraviolet light to identify compromised communications equipment without alerting potential targets to ongoing operations. The technology of surveillance extended to mail interception programs that monitored correspondence between the United States and the Soviet Union, with CIA documents revealing that by 1958, 200 to 300 agency employees were exclusively engaged in examining mail bound for communist countries. The program indexed approximately 250,000 names and built a specialized laboratory in New York to examine correspondence for secret writing, microdots, and coded messages. By 1961, the CIA was screening 500,000 pieces of mail per month, with approximately 1,200 items receiving close scrutiny for intelligence value. The scope of the mail interception program demonstrated the extent to which American intelligence agencies were willing to violate traditional privacy expectations in pursuit of national security objectives. The documents revealed multiple vignettes of intelligence operations that illustrated the methods and mindset of Cold War espionage, including a CIA program that used Robert Maheu, a former FBI agent, to procure female companions for foreign dignitaries visiting the United States in hopes of gathering intelligence information. One operation went awry when a Middle Eastern leader became lovesick and ready to give up the throne for his CIA-provided companion, forcing the agency to take steps to end the relationship. In another embarrassing incident, the CIA accidentally matched an Arab leader with a Jewish woman, creating a diplomatic complication that required careful management to avoid international embarrassment. The agency's operations extended to biological warfare planning with Operation Square Dance, which proposed introducing parasites into Cuban sugarcane plants to cripple the island's economy and strain Castro's security forces. The newly released documents revealed that the CIA had followed through on at least part of this plan, with a 1973 memo documenting that the agency had injected a contaminating agent in Cuban sugar bound for the Soviet Union. The revelation demonstrated the lengths to which American intelligence services were prepared to go in their campaign against communist governments, using methods that violated international norms and potentially endangered civilian populations. One of the most significant operational revelations concerned the CIA's infiltration of the French intelligence service in 1963, based on suspicions that Soviet agents had penetrated the agency and were passing American intelligence to Moscow. The operation involved placing a CIA asset within French intelligence, but by January 1964, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was mocking the CIA for the operation, saying, "I think this whole thing has been imaginary on the part of CIA, which has been played as a sucker." The French operation escalated to include breaking and entering at the French consulate in Washington, D.C., with CIA operatives removing documents in clear violation of diplomatic protocols and potentially criminal law. The assassination of Dominican Republic President Rafael Trujillo on May 30, 1961, provided another window into CIA operations, with newly released documents revealing the agency's role in providing weapons to the dissidents who killed the dictator. A July 1975 document detailed the CIA's provision of one small-size high-power weapon, along with 3 pistols, and permission to pass 3 carbines to the dissidents who carried out the assassination. The Trujillo operation demonstrated the CIA's willingness to support regime change through violent means when diplomatic and economic pressure proved insufficient to achieve American policy objectives. The surveillance apparatus that would later focus so intensively on Lee Harvey Oswald was already well established by the time he defected to the Soviet Union in October 1959, with intelligence agencies maintaining files on thousands of American citizens who traveled to communist countries, expressed sympathy for foreign ideologies, or engaged in activities that might compromise national security. The FBI's domestic counterintelligence programs monitored American citizens who joined communist organizations, attended socialist meetings, or corresponded with individuals in communist countries, while the CIA maintained extensive files on Americans who traveled abroad and might be targeted for recruitment by foreign intelligence services. When Oswald walked into the American embassy in Moscow on October 31, 1959, and announced his intention to renounce his American citizenship and defect to the Soviet Union, he triggered a surveillance apparatus that would monitor his every move for the rest of his short life. The former Marine's defection was particularly troubling to American intelligence services because of his access to classified information about U-2 spy plane operations during his service at Atsugi Air Base in Japan, where he had worked as a radar operator with access to flight schedules and operational details that could compromise ongoing intelligence collection efforts. The CIA's Mexico City station, revealed in the newly released documents to be organized into Soviet branch, Cuban branch, satellite branch, covert action branch, Communist Party branch, and an operational support branch, became a critical component in the surveillance of Oswald when he traveled to Mexico City on September 27, 1963, less than 2 months before Kennedy's assassination. The station had developed sophisticated capabilities for monitoring visitors to communist embassies, using both technical surveillance and human assets to track the activities of Americans who might be seeking to defect or engage in espionage activities. The documents revealed that the CIA station had recruited a Catholic priest as a principal agent for operations targeting rural and peasant populations, with the project showing promise of expanding into Guatemala, where the Archbishop had requested assistance and training to establish a similar organization. This revelation illustrated the extent to which American intelligence services were prepared to use religious institutions and figures to advance their operational objectives, potentially compromising the neutrality and moral authority of religious organizations in service of intelligence gathering. Oswald's visit to the Cuban and Soviet embassies in Mexico City placed him directly under the surveillance apparatus that the CIA had established to monitor communist diplomatic facilities, with the agency recording telephone conversations between Oswald and embassy personnel and maintaining detailed records of his movements during his stay in the Mexican capital. The surveillance operation provided intelligence agencies with advance warning that Oswald was seeking to travel to Cuba, potentially for the purpose of defecting permanently to a communist country, where he might provide valuable intelligence to America's enemies. The newly released documents contain previously classified details about Oswald's telephone conversations with Soviet embassy personnel, including recordings that captured him identifying himself during at least one of 3 monitored calls. The conversation suggested that Oswald was actively seeking assistance in traveling to Cuba, possibly as a stepping stone to permanent residence in the Soviet Union or another communist country. The CIA's ability to monitor these conversations in real time provided American intelligence services with detailed knowledge of Oswald's intentions and plans, raising questions about why more aggressive action was not taken to prevent his return to the United States or to monitor his activities more closely after his return to Dallas. The surveillance of Oswald extended to mail interception programs that monitored his correspondence with his mother and other family members, with documents revealing that the CIA had intercepted and photographed letters sent to Oswald during his time in the Soviet Union. The mail monitoring program provided intelligence agencies with insights into Oswald's personal relationships, financial situation, and emotional state during his defection, information that could have been used to assess his potential as a security threat or intelligence asset. A previously classified April 1975 CIA memo, now revealed in fuller detail, showed the agency downplaying what it knew about Oswald's Mexico City trip in communications with congressional investigators and the Warren Commission. The memo documented that the CIA had recorded telephone conversations between Oswald and embassy personnel, but suggested that the intelligence value of these conversations was limited, a characterization that later documents would reveal to be incomplete or misleading. The pattern of surveillance and intelligence gathering revealed in the newly released documents painted a picture of American intelligence agencies that were far more aware of Oswald's activities and intentions than had previously been acknowledged in official investigations. The extent of surveillance suggested that intelligence agencies had multiple opportunities to assess Oswald's potential as a security threat and to take preventive action if they believed he posed a danger to American officials or national security interests. The relationship between President Kennedy and the intelligence community, as revealed in the newly released documents, was far more contentious than had been publicly acknowledged during his administration or in the immediate aftermath of his assassination. A highly critical memo written by Kennedy aide Arthur Schlesinger on June 10, 1961, took the CIA to task for undermining the State Department and exposing American foreign policy to embarrassment through unauthorized intelligence operations in friendly countries, including Singapore, Japan, and Pakistan. Schlesinger warned Kennedy that clandestine intelligence collection exposes American foreign policy to a multitude of embarrassments when CIA is discovered recruiting agents or developing sources in a friendly country, noting that in many cases, neither the embassy nor the department in Washington is normally informed of this type of operation. The memo revealed a fundamental tension between the Kennedy White House's desire for diplomatic solutions to international problems and the CIA's preference for covert operations that might compromise official diplomatic efforts. The Bay of Pigs invasion in April 1961 had created lasting mistrust between Kennedy and the CIA, with the president feeling that he had been misled about the operation's chances of success and the extent of American involvement that would be required to ensure victory. The CIA had assured Kennedy that Cuban exiles, trained and equipped by the agency, could successfully invade Cuba and overthrow Fidel Castro without direct American military support. But the operation failed catastrophically when Castro's forces quickly defeated the exile army and captured most of the survivors. Kennedy's anger over the Bay of Pigs failure led to increased White House oversight of CIA operations and a general skepticism about intelligence assessments that would characterize his relationship with the agency for the remainder of his presidency. The president reportedly threatened to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the winds, a comment that would later fuel conspiracy theories about agency involvement in his assassination, but which reflected his genuine frustration with intelligence failures and unauthorized operations. The newly released documents revealed the extent to which the CIA was operating independently of State Department oversight and White House control, conducting operations that could embarrass the United States or compromise official diplomatic initiatives without informing the appropriate government officials. The intelligence community's culture of secrecy and operational autonomy created conditions where individual CIA officers or stations could initiate operations without adequate oversight or consideration of broader policy implications. The political pressures facing the Kennedy administration during the height of the Cold War created demands for intelligence success that pushed CIA officers to take risks and pursue operations that might not have been approved under more careful consideration. The president faced criticism from Republicans and conservative Democrats for being soft on communism, creating pressure to demonstrate American resolve through covert action programs that could achieve foreign policy objectives without the political costs associated with direct military intervention. The intelligence community's response to these political pressures included programs that pushed the boundaries of legal authority and international law, including assassination plots against foreign leaders, biological warfare operations, and surveillance programs that violated the constitutional rights of American citizens. The culture of secrecy that protected these operations from public scrutiny also insulated them from the normal processes of democratic oversight and accountability that might have prevented the most serious abuses. The economic and political costs of Cold War intelligence operations were enormous, with the CIA budget growing from millions to billions of dollars as the agency expanded its global footprint and developed increasingly sophisticated technical capabilities for surveillance and covert action. The financial resources devoted to intelligence gathering reflected the high priority that successive administrations placed on understanding and countering Soviet capabilities and intentions, but also created bureaucratic incentives for the intelligence community to justify its existence through the discovery or creation of threats that required continued attention and resources. The prisoner exchange programs that became routine during the Cold War provided another mechanism for intelligence agencies to demonstrate their value while managing the human costs of espionage operations, with the CIA and KGB regularly negotiating the release of captured agents through carefully orchestrated swaps that attracted international attention and reinforced public perceptions of ongoing intelligence warfare. The most famous of these exchanges involved U-2 pilot Francis Gary Powers, who was shot down over the Soviet Union in May 1960 and eventually exchanged for Soviet agent Rudolf Abel in February 1962. The propaganda value of intelligence operations often outweighed their actual intelligence benefits, with both American and Soviet agencies staging elaborate operations designed primarily to embarrass their opponents or demonstrate their own capabilities, rather than to gather useful information. The CIA's development of exotic assassination devices and surveillance technologies served as much to intimidate foreign intelligence services as to accomplish specific operational objectives, creating a psychological warfare component that extended beyond traditional espionage activities. The legal cover for intelligence operations during the Cold War relied heavily on presidential authorities and national security justifications that would later be recognized as inadequate to protect constitutional rights and democratic governance, but which at the time provided sufficient legal basis for operations that pushed the boundaries of acceptable government conduct. The intelligence community operated under legal interpretations that gave broad latitude for activities that might otherwise violate criminal law or constitutional protections, justified by the extraordinary threat posed by Soviet espionage and subversion activities. The logistics of Cold War intelligence operations required extensive support networks that included front companies, safe houses, communication systems, and transportation capabilities that could move personnel and equipment around the world without detection by foreign intelligence services or law enforcement agencies. The complexity of these support networks made intelligence operations vulnerable to detection and compromise, but also provided the infrastructure necessary for operations that spanned multiple countries and required years of preparation and execution. The catalyst for the final release of JFK assassination documents came from a combination of political pressure, legal requirements, and changing attitudes about government secrecy that made continued classification increasingly difficult to justify after more than 60 years. The Trump administration's decision to release the files represented a significant victory for government transparency. Advocates who had fought for decades to force the disclosure of documents that many believed contained evidence of government misconduct or cover-up activities related to the assassination. The timeline of document releases stretched over several days in March 2025, with the National Archives uploading files in batches that allowed researchers and journalists to begin analyzing the material, while additional documents were still being prepared for release. The staged release created a media narrative that sustained public attention over several news cycles, ensuring that the document revelations would receive sustained coverage rather than being overwhelmed by other news events. Public reaction to the document releases was mixed, with some observers expressing disappointment that the files did not contain dramatic revelations that would fundamentally change understanding of the assassination, while others praised the release as an important step toward government accountability and transparency. The absence of smoking gun evidence of a conspiracy disappointed conspiracy theorists who had hoped the files would vindicate their theories, but researchers noted that the documents provided valuable insights into government operations and intelligence gathering methods that had previously been hidden from public view. The internal tensions within government agencies about document disclosure were evident in the continued redactions and delays that characterized the release process, with intelligence agencies arguing that some information still required protection to avoid compromising ongoing operations or revealing intelligence methods that remained relevant to current activities. Critics argued that after 60 years, virtually all operational concerns should have been resolved, and that continued secrecy served only to protect agencies from embarrassment rather than to protect legitimate national security interests. The immediate consequences of the document release included renewed calls for congressional oversight of intelligence activities and demands for similar transparency regarding other historical events that remain shrouded in government secrecy, including documents related to the assassinations of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. that were promised in the same executive order that led to the JFK file releases. The aftermath of the document release began with scholarly analysis of the newly available material, as historians, political scientists, and legal experts began the long process of integrating the new information into existing narratives about the Kennedy assassination and Cold War intelligence operations. The University of Virginia's Center for Politics organized student researchers to analyze the documents systematically, providing a model for academic engagement with declassified materials that could inform future releases of historical documents. The archives that opened as a result of the document release provided researchers with unprecedented access to intelligence community records that had been sealed since the 1960s, creating opportunities for scholarship that could reshape understanding of American foreign policy, intelligence operations, and government accountability during the Cold War era. The National Archives' digital release of the documents made them immediately available to researchers around the world, democratizing access to historical materials that had previously been available only to government officials and cleared researchers. Personal reckonings with the document contents varied widely, with family members of assassination victims, former government officials, and intelligence personnel offering different perspectives on the appropriateness and timing of the disclosure. Some welcomed the transparency as long overdue, while others expressed concern that the release could compromise ongoing intelligence operations or embarrass allied governments that had cooperated with American intelligence services during the Cold War. Museums and educational institutions began incorporating the newly released documents into exhibits and curricula designed to help the public understand the historical context of the Kennedy assassination and the broader intelligence operations of the Cold War era, creating educational opportunities that could inform public understanding of government secrecy and democratic accountability. The legal processes triggered by the document release included congressional hearings examining the role of intelligence agencies in the assassination investigation and the appropriateness of continued classification of historical documents, with lawmakers from both parties expressing concern about the executive branch's ability to withhold information from Congress and the public for extended periods without adequate justification. Historical reassessment of the Kennedy assassination and the government's response to it began immediately after the document release, with historians and journalists publishing analyses that incorporated the new information into existing narratives about the events of November 22, 1963, and the investigations that followed. The reassessment process would likely continue for years as researchers digested the enormous volume of newly available material and developed new interpretations of familiar events. The conclusion drawn from the newly released JFK assassination documents is that government secrecy, even when justified by legitimate national security concerns, carries costs that extend far beyond the immediate protection of intelligence sources and methods to undermine public trust in democratic institutions and accountability mechanisms that depend on informed public participation. The 6-decade delay in releasing these documents created a credibility gap that will be difficult to bridge, as Americans wonder what other historical events remain hidden behind classification barriers and what current government activities are being conducted without adequate public oversight or congressional accountability. The documents reveal a government that was far more intrusive and far-reaching in its surveillance and intelligence-gathering activities than most Americans realized. Operating programs that monitored private communications, infiltrated foreign governments, and conducted operations that violated international law and constitutional protections in service of national security objectives that were broadly defined and inadequately overseen by elected officials and democratic institutions. The human cost of these intelligence operations extended beyond the immediate targets to include American citizens whose privacy was violated, foreign populations who were subjected to covert interference in their domestic affairs, and the democratic institutions that were undermined by excessive secrecy and inadequate accountability mechanisms that failed to provide effective oversight of intelligence activities. The lesson that emerges from these documents is that democratic societies must maintain constant vigilance against the expansion of government secrecy and intelligence activities that operate beyond effective oversight, not because intelligence gathering is inherently wrong or unnecessary, but because the power to operate in secret inevitably creates opportunities for abuse that can undermine the very democratic values that intelligence services are supposed to protect. The balance between security and transparency remains as challenging today as it was during the Cold War, but the Kennedy assassination documents demonstrate that excessive secrecy ultimately serves neither security nor democratic governance effectively.